What is going on, everyone? Tutorial Tim here, and today we're going to be going over something a little different in regards to the application and creation, where we'll be getting our hands dirty with code, but we're going to start by deconstructing interfaces that we like. So as an example here, I found this very straightforward layout. Has some title and copy and like a description in relation to the image here in this section. And basically what I'm going to do is extract any CSS values and turn this into a design in Figma, since this is currently on the web. And then from there, we're going to recreate this from scratch in code, and I'll show you how to do that. And we'll also do another approach where we convert this to web, where we'll convert this to Webflow as well in the future. So without any further ado, let's get started. Here you'll notice this website, fayapp.com. There's motion associated with this, right? So the motion we're not going to do, but what we will do is kind of just visually see this lockup here where it's roughly centered here. So I'll grab this, just wait for that to disappear. Then once I have that, I can go ahead and paste this in Figma. And if I want to, we can go in. I'm going to hit Command-Shift-C. So with Command-Shift-C, this will pop up your developer tools. I'm using Firefox Dev Edition. I like the way the features they have for viewing Flexbox properties and CSS and yada yada. If you can't find it, you can always go Google how to find the inspector tool. And then with that said, I can try and figure out the height of this, right, if I want to, or we could set it up to where it's like absorbs the vertical height based on like the monitor viewing it when we code this part out. So we have a height of 2200 here, and we could mimic that if we want to, and we can just dig deeper into the classes here. And here I am seeing now the max width that is applied with padding applied as well to the left and right. So here with that max width, I'm going to go ahead and grab that. So we have 1220 by 1010. So if we want, we can just grab a frame here. Once we create this frame, I'm going to go ahead and just select like this MacBook Air, right? The dimensions are close enough, and we got 1220 by 1010. Whoops. So something of that nature. All right. So with that, I can further break this down, and we got all these different divs here and whatnot, but I'm not going to worry about the dimensions of like the text box here because we're going to have the text automatically kind of wrap based on like the max width for that text box, and then the height will adjust accordingly. And what I'm going to go ahead and do, and what I challenge you to do, I'll do it here once, is we're going to need to extract styles, right? So if you haven't used the inspector tool before, this should be a good exercise, from the get-go, getting your hands dirty with, trying to extract these values. And I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to do it with this one. I'm actually trying to find the header style here, and you can see there's a lot of nesting and craziness going on, so that can be challenging too. So just keep that in mind. And with all this okay, here we go. I've targeted the right div, so now it looks like we're getting close to, okay, we got an H2 here, and we have all these properties, and it has a transition here. But for now, I'm just going to only copy the CSS properties, and I actually need to figure out what this font is. So in filter style, I'm going to search for font family, and they're using a font called Calibri font. So you could, you know, search for that online, try and download it or whatever. You know, be aware of licensing. So like, as you can see here, you know, you're probably going to have to buy this based on kind of whatever the deal is. Since we're using this for educational purposes, I'm honestly just going to use a different font, even though I really like that font. Just don't want to come across any licensing issues. So with that said, I'm going to hit Control-C, copy that background color. You know, we could even, in the design, I kind of like having these 4-pixel grids right here as like my base layer. And since that, I might want to, you know, change the strength of that as well. Opacity, and then, you know, based on like the grid layout we inspected, you know, very standard having a 12-column grid layout. Let's see here. Let's get something a little stronger currently, and maybe we want it centered. We're actually gonna want it centered. All right, gutter set to 20. That's fine. What we really want to do is figure out so with that width set, we want to figure out exactly making sure that this frame, right, is roughly the same. Like, it's not going to be perfect in this example, but it'll be good enough. So with that, with this grid set to center, I'm actually going to have the frame itself snap to this, or I could give it, or I can, you know, give it some margin if I wanted to or whatever. But for the sake of this, I'm going to keep this there, and then I'll show you something later. At the end, it's probably a little funky to some of you, but at the end of the day, we get to achieve the same end result. All right, so I have this grid set up, right? Okay, cool. So now I can start snapping things if I want. And with the grid, there was... So I want to actually make that an auto layout and change all these properties to 0, except for these. There were margins of 40 there. And I'm actually going to do something. I'm going to change the width from hug, and I need to, okay, so the original width is set to 1228, but here we're going to do something a little snazzy. Since we added margins of 40 pixels to the left and right of this frame, I'm going to do some math and add 80 more pixels to achieve that grid width of 1228 still. So it's actually going to have that grid width of 1228, but the margins are set to 40, if that makes sense. I probably didn't explain that entirely well, all that well. So with that, all right, we got our grid. So what's next? All right, now we're just going to go back, pick the font you like, and I'm just going to go ahead and use enter, go figure. And all right, I know that they were using an H2, which is great. Now I need to go back and figure out exactly what elements I was inspecting. All right, okay, here's H2. All right, so now I need to remove my filter, and I have my CSS properties, right? And you can even shift click in this web browser and it'll change to like the hex code, the HSL variation of that color format. So that's very helpful. I oftentimes swap between all that jazz to like really figure out what's going on there. And then, all right, cool. I got that text, everything unlike anything. Cool. there's this really awesome plugin I use called something to CSS, to CSS, from CSS. All right, we're gonna download it. Okay, so if I go to the community, basically what it does is, you know, this will save you a lot of time. Even this Figma plugin, this Figma plugin basically allows you to copy your CSS to Figma. CSS to Figma from, I think it's called from CSS. Yeah, there we go. All right. So it's super easy, nothing like fancy. So you try it out and you have it. All right, great. Now we go in here and then type in from CSS, and I am gonna make sure I have this text selected, and then in this, here's a bunch of helpful stuff, and then you can delete that if you want. And then in the CSS class, boom, I just pasted literally what was in my web browser, the values that I wanted with the weight. And now I just need to specify a font family because each font family is different in regards to their font weight. So like that visual characteristic. So here you'll see that this isn't as bold as what's specified for Calibri because I'm using the Enter font, which I guess maybe regular set to 600 for Enter. Not entirely sure. Wait, so if I go back, okay, boom, and I set that to bold, I'm good to go. And then also, if you want to really be sure, like in this exercise, because I had extracted the font weight to 600 based off of the Calibri font, you know, you can always just go into dev mode and check out what exactly the font weight was. And for Enter, the font weight's set to 700. And there you go. You there's your answer. So there's a little bit of process elimination right there. Awesome. So with that, all right, I got my H2. So I could even just rename this H2 in the layers. I'm gonna rename this auto layout layer to section. I'm gonna try and mimic some of the naming conventions for a more semantic approach if this were to be implemented on the web. So like, you can kind of think of these layers as representations of the DOM as well. That makes sense. Yeah, so sweet. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab this text now. So not only are we going to copy the string, all right, this is paragraph. We're definitely going to copy the paragraph. And then I'm going to paste the paragraph. Also want to know what the max width here is. Looks like it's roughly 542 pixels. And we have the styling for the font size and the line height. And I could even just use from CSS again if I wanted to and just paste that. And then it'll adjust it, but I didn't specify a font weight, so I need to change that to regular. And then the font color's also different. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab that and paste that in here. And then that max width was set to, wow, what the heck is going on here? That max width was set to 542. And then they aligned the text. And then you could even do the same thing with this H2. What I'm gonna do is apply an auto layout frame to this and just call it header plus description or something. Or if I really wanted to like try and be more CSS like semantic in regards to directly translating this to a CSS class, I could just do this header and description and then even prepend it with a dot, right? And then I don't have to do that with this layer in Figma because it's not a class, it's a tag or whatever. You get what I'm getting at there. And then we're going to want to apply with auto layout, since that is kind of a direct reflection of Flexbox. We can go ahead and change the vertical gap to 16, and then also ensure that the alignment for auto layout is set to align top center as opposed to left, align top left. And then we can start by plopping this in, and then before I do that, I'm going to make sure that the height is fixed as well. So I'm going to grab my header now, and then here it plops it top align top left, but I want that to be centered as well. And now this is a great opportunity to go into the CSS and just kind of figure out what could the height be right there, right? You know, you can spend all your time inspecting and stuff, but since, you know, I don't want you to be too restricted, I just want you to know enough about inspecting stuff in the web browser to give you more creative freedoms. And I'll hopefully also help you translate your communications to front-end developers as well in the future. But, you know, go ahead and just toss some spacing in it. Like, you know, maybe you want top and bottom, you know, padding for that section to be 80. So everything will snap to that at that point. So, okay, I got that set to 80 there. And then I can turn off my grids as needed. And it's starting to look somewhat similar, right? The type family's different for sure, but that's okay. And then next thing we're going to do is tackle creating this div, right? We're going to make this a div, and it's going to be our description and image. So with that said, I can go ahead and even copy this, and then I'm going to rename this. I'm very excited to learn how to apply this radial gradient here. I think this just adds a nice pop and layer of depth. I don't know. That's just me. And that's really why I chose this layout, is because I wanted to figure out how to do that. And you know, it's easy to do. You can do it, you know, in Figma and just by extracting the CSS, which is so powerful. Yeah, and with that, try and keep my mouth shut a little more and keep it moving here. All right, I'm gonna inspect this paragraph and figure out what the properties are, and I got that, and that we already have the color for that paragraph, so now I can use that from CSS and paste this, and then boom, we got that. Font size set to. Oh, I applied that to the auto. I need to apply that directly to the text. I had the auto layout layer selected. Okay, cool. So now the text is slightly bigger. The font is also bigger. I'm going to set that to semi-bold. And then left align the text. I actually think there should be more, some more line height here. So just gonna keep playing with it till it's something I think would work well. There you go. I'm just gonna go with that. Might be a little too much, honestly, but you know, you can just continue to touch that up later on. Okay, cool. So, all right. And then if we really want, we can copy the string, right? Copy the string, and then I'll just paste that. Well, I actually ended up grabbing a different string. That was weird. Okay, so there we go. We have that. And then we can make that white. There we go, it's fairly accurate. And now, all right, we have our description here. We can figure out what the max width of this paragraph is. And it looks like it's set to 360, so we can go ahead and ensure that that's set to 360. And what we want to do is make sure that our text is set to fill container so that it adheres to that text box's properties there. I might actually readdress this to where the box is set to, like, say 438 or maybe 436. So all those characters, words, there's more than one word on each line. That last line there almost had an ant or whatever it's called. And then with that, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this image. I know it's an image because I've inspected it prior to this video, or maybe there we go. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Okay, there we go. See, it's a lot of digging into classes, if you will. And there's the image. I just command clicked on it to just get the exact source of that image. I'm gonna copy it and then paste that into my canvas. And then I have the source image, which is, very high resolution. And for the sake of this video, I'm not gonna get into perfecting the image and all that jazz. So with that, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and just get the dimensions of the image in this instance, 1190 by 340. Okay, so I'm gonna actually have let's see if it'll do it. Okay, that's basically that. The dimensions are almost perfect when copying this image into Figma. So what I'm going to do now is actually wrap these two, copy that class and just call this the description. And then I'm going to apply an auto layout frame and then paste this class, and then I'm going to call this image. And this is where things will start to get interesting. So I'm gonna go ahead and type in auto, or you could select auto, and this allows the content in regards to its fluidity or responsiveness to be set to space between. And then another thing we're going to want to do is ensure that the auto layout content vertically stacks. I'm going to push this up. And then we're going to want to figure out the spacing between these two items, and we can just set that as the gap for that section. And then I can turn off my grid. And you can see this is starting to come to life, right? And what I'm going to do with this description image layer here is set this to fill container. And this almost looks good, but why is this image doing that? So with the application of us using Flexbox and all that, we're going to want to apply special, principles around the positioning of this to not adhere to Flexbox to an extent. So that's where you leverage this position absolute property, because it will disregard kind of the image or whatever. It'll disregard the positioning in the context of auto layout, but we'll have to kind of just keep tweaking this to see where it goes. And you'll notice that we may have to get less fluid with our height hugging the content, so we're going to probably have a fixed height and set that to 340 for this description image layer. And with that, we'll actually end up probably removing this align center here for this text by getting rid of this justifying the space between here. So if I hit 0, I can reset the horizontal gap, since that's actually being disregarded because of this absolute positioning. I can go ahead with this image and even crop it to the width of this container, if that makes sense. Say this was the bounding box of your web browser right here on this edge, and now the next thing I'm trying to figure out is, all right, how am I slapping in this radial gradient, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and dang it, and just inspect that CSS again, and just gotta find where I was. There it is. Keep going, just keep swimming. Okay, cool. So all right, now here I'm starting to see, I know what I'm kind of already looking for, and it's this background CSS property where they're applying a radial gradient value, and it looks like it's actually kind of anchored too. There's also some box shadow applied as well to the container itself of the image, which we could even throw in. And they specify the height here. They even have some other stuff, but we're just going to focus on that radial gradient. Like, I don't think we really need to add all that stuff right now for the sake of this video. And what I'm going to do is, you can add a fill and another fill on that image layer and change that to a gradient, and then there's the radial property, and then you can kind of change where it's coming from, so it looked like it was coming from the corner, and then there's just like a bunch of ways to kind of figure out how to apply this, right? So with this gradient, if I move it under, it's going to disappear, right? So you can change the opacity of this gradient. I need to keep messing with it to get it to work. So I'm going to start with radial. Then I'm going to go to 0% opacity. All right, so there we go. So now we kind of have this sort of effect, right? And it's in Figma, it looks pretty strong, right? And we're not covering enough. So what we need to do is, we could either do this, or maybe with this layer selected, we could try this from CSS and paste this in, right? So it just pasted it in, right, on our image, and it just gave us this hex code of zeros. So that's not what we want. So that didn't work, right? So with that, we're going to have to go ahead and just continue to modify this radial gradient. And honestly, I kind of want this, I want to add another, there we go. I want this to be a little stronger in the midsection. Kind of pay attention to this image. It's kind of got, the darkness doesn't extend too far. So we might want to actually move it out here. Make sure I'm just gonna keep tweaking this till I found something that is visually appealing. And so for me right now, I find that it'll take me a lot of time to get this sort of radial gradient applied. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do something I'd much rather prefer, which is the linear gradient. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete this right here, delete that, and then select linear. And then I'm going to go from here, hold shift. Ah, crud. And I'm going to, there we go, get this in here, and I'm going to just kind of stretch it out till it makes sense to me. And you know, maybe that looks good to me, right? So that is essentially the design approach for extracting and deconstructing that interface from a CSS perspective. And then, as you see here, ideally we'll probably want this all centered, right, on our screen. And here it's kind of all the alignment set to align top left, but I can easily push all that down to align center, so all that content just is centered, right, in my view. So if we preview this in preview mode, this is centered. So there we go. Now we got it, right? So now the next step is going to be us going in and coding this. So that we're not going to be perfect about the coding implementation. We're going to get dirty with just leveraging, Flexbox for positioning things and just styling things directly from dev mode. And it's going to be really simple, guys. So don't overthink it. Everything's going to be good. We're going to go ahead and start with this section, right? And I have this image as the reference. And literally all we did, look how clean this is. We have our section. We have our header and description with an H2 and a description, right? And then we have our description again, our description text. Just going to rename these layers to keep them clean, right? And then we have an image, and it has a linear gradient applied to it. And here we can see that style applied that we're going to copy. So with all that said, out of dev mode, I'm going to pause this video and get my code editor, CodePen set up.